It all started with a report of an animal sighting in a local vicinity. I was asked to check a concern of an old lady who claimed that she saw a wild animal roaming across her yard. Since the neighborhood was not that far from the animal reserve, it sounded nothing unusual at all. If ever the situation was beyond my expertise, all I needed to do is call the wild animal experts and let them handle it. I was only supposed to identify whatever it might be based on the tracks and the description from the witness, but both of these initial clues were quite perplexing and hard to believe. The civilian said that she saw a silhouette of an animal who stood on its 2 feet, which she estimated to be at least 8 feet tall. It was easy to assume that what she saw might have been an adult bear, and her description was an exaggeration. However, the tracks I saw in her yard suggested otherwise. It looked like hooves, but significantly larger than anything I had ever seen, and there were also traces of prints on the ground that looked like it belonged to an impossibly large human. I'm a 6-foot tall middle-aged man, but my hand was just a third of the size of the print on the ground. She also added that this bipedal animal had some kind of webbed horns, but she couldn't see it clearly since there was no light in her yard. Nothing about this report made sense at all. But it was clear that someone, or rather something, was there just a moment ago. As I was about to report back to the station about the concern, I received another request from the radio. The location of the next report wasn't far from where I was. Our office in the countryside was severely undermanned at the time, and I was already within the area anyway. I was obligated to comply with the request and leave the other case unsolved. The next one was another sighting of a wild animal crossing the road. Strangely enough, the description from the 2 witnesses were similar to the previous case. This time around, a young couple claimed that they saw an unidentified animal passing by. They had more detailed description about what they saw, but it still didn't make any sense at all. It came from the direction where I was driving from, and they told me that it headed towards the bushes. It ran upright with wide strides as if it was galloping on 2 legs. They said that it had hollow eyes, and when it turned its head towards them for a second, and the head looked more like a skull with a pair of antlers. I couldn't believe what I was hearing from this couple who seemed genuinely afraid of what they just encountered. Based on these 2 reports, both of them were describing a wendigo. I wanted to believe that what these people saw wasn't the real thing. Out of panic and fright, they might have overstated the description in their statements. It must have been nothing more than just a big guy in a costume running around and trying to scare people. It wouldn't be the first time that it happened, but that wasn't the case. When I went back to the station, I told my head officer and the others about these strange reports. Needless to say, they laughed about it. One of the junior officers elaborated the description of the unidentified beast by using a folklore as a reference, and he said that this creature is an evil spirit that feasts on human flesh. A wendigo was told to be a manifestation of insufferable hunger and greed, and those who were overwhelmed by their primitive instincts would shut their hearts out to turn themselves into a savage beast. There was no way that these people actually saw a mythical being from the old tales, much less an unfathomable, terrifying one. None of the witnesses who saw it were harmed, or so I thought. Less than an hour later, we received another call from someone who claimed to have seen the same creature from the previous reports. But this time around, it was no ordinary sighting. The caller was gasping for air and mumbling in fear. He said that he saw a large bipedal animal eating a person. He said that it was all black with a bony head and spiny antlers. He told us that he ran for his life while the monstrous beast was devouring its victim, and there was nothing he could do to help him. Like my previous reaction, the other officers at the station could not wrap their heads around the fact that a violent animal who looked like a mythical beast was seen 3 times in a row on the same night. These questionable reports were turning into a feasible case. Along with Officer Jacobs, we immediately rushed at the site. The location was roughly 60 miles away from the previous sighting of the unidentified animal. At the time, we couldn't even get ourselves to classify the attacker as a wendigo despite of the stated descriptions. It simply sounded too implausible for us to accept it as it was. However, to cover such distance in less than an hour would be quite a feat for any known animal of that size. At the back of our heads, we were thinking the same thing, but were too ashamed to mention it. According to the folklore, a wendigo is also known for its remarkable speed. Things were starting to add up, and we couldn't admit the fact that we were simply not ready to encounter a fabled beast. When we arrived at the site, our fears had spiked even further. Just like what was stated in the report, we saw the disembodied remains of a man. We knew that the victim was beyond help, but we did not expect to see such a horrific scene. It looked like he was riding a bicycle when he was attacked. Unlike the lady inside her house and the couple in their car, this man was out in the open and was easily snatched. His bike was deformed and bent as if it was hit by a truck several times over, and the trail of blood suggested that he was dragged under the shadows of the nearby trees. He was torn and shredded beyond recognition, with his limbs thrown a few feet away from his body and with the majority of his other parts missing. It looked as if he was tactlessly devoured by a pack of hungry lions. I have seen a few cases of people who were attacked by wild animals before, but I have never seen something this brutally severe. We were absolutely certain at this point that the assailant was not a mere man in a costume, and this case was way beyond our league. We asked for assistance from the wild animal professionals, but it would take more than an hour before they could get to the location. Since someone had already died, we had to handle the situation as much as we could at the moment. Based on the tracks and the previous sightings, we realized that the beast was heading north. Jacobs and I drove as fast as we could to warn the civilians within that area. More officers were also dispatched to back us up, but the next encounter simply came too soon for anybody else to lend a hand. As we headed to the next vicinity, we heard a number of screaming from afar. We could also hear some gunshots of different rounds coming from the same spot. The beast was already there, and the place was in turmoil. We already saw 2 viciously defiled dead bodies as we passed along. My heart was pounding wildly as I desperately tried to remain composed. I was sweating profusely as we approached this heinous entity who was too abysmal to actually exist. With crippling fear and complete disbelief, we walked out of our vehicle and unholstered our firearms. 4 armed civilians were emptying all their rounds as they were persistently firing at this giant beast who remained completely unfazed. It stood at least 9 feet tall and its skin was charcoal black. Its head was that of a deer skull since there was barely any flesh on it, and its antlers were spread on both sides with sharp spines. It was biting through the shoulders of its victim who was already dead, and we could hear its bones breaking while the merciless beast was gripping it rightly with its gigantic hands. People were crying and screaming inside their houses, and those who were brave enough to fire at this horrifying entity were growing hopeless in every passing moment. It could not be killed with guns, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. Out of desperation, Officer Jacobs jumped back into our vehicle and revved it up. He boldly drove towards the black beast and ran it over as hard as he could. Specks of ashes came off from its body and scattered in the air during the impact. It seemed that its body was composed of it, and it explained why it was completely unharmed no matter how many times we tried to shoot it. The beast was sent flying a few feet away. Officer Jacobs got out of the car with a dislocated arm as the Wendigo got up from the ground and growled. All the armed men, including me, instinctively took a step back when we realized that we just anchored a monster that couldn't be killed. As the dent in his abdomen where the car hit was regenerating, I noticed something in it. There was a body of a man right inside the black beast, and I was reminded of the story that the junior officer told me back at the station. A Wendigo was but a man who was possessed by an evil spirit, and the only way to kill it was to shatter the heart of the host. I no longer questioned the tall tale and desperately hoped that it was actually true. If the story was right, we could hurt it by fire and kill this immortal beast by shattering its heart. I told the armed civilians to grab some gasoline or anything that could set it ablaze. However, the savage beast did not give us much time to prepare. It lunged towards an armed civilian and snatched him off the ground. It tore his body into 2, and then he charged towards the next one. We were being massacred in the blink of an eye, and it was virtually impossible to aim at its heart while it was moving so fast. One of the households heard what I said and brought out a gallon of gasoline. I rushed towards them as the others kept on firing at the beast. I removed my shirt and soaked it with gasoline. The others saw what I was doing and they followed my lead. I tried to get as close as I could to the rampaging Wendigo, and then I tossed my soaked shirt towards it. My shirt got caught in its antlers and the gasoline started dripping on its body. 3 brave civilians also did the same, but not all of them were successful. One of them was caught when he got too close to the beast, and he was brutally killed as well. When the Wendigo was already covered in gasoline, I threw a lighter right at it and set it on fire. The giant black beast was completely disarrayed. It growled and shrilled while running aimlessly in attempt to put out the fire. We kept on feeding the flames until it was completely engulfed by it. Few minutes later, the Wendigo finally grew weaker and slower. It dropped on its knees and a number of bullet rounds pulverized its chest as we all aimed for its heart. The thick layer of black ash that covered the body of its host gradually dispersed. When the fire was put out, all that was left was a corpse of a man. A total of 6 civilians lost their lives during that encounter, but we managed to defeat the unfathomable creature of the old tales. A few days later after the incident, the host of the beast was identified. The autopsy revealed that the man was long dead before the encounter. Strangely enough, there wasn't any bullet wounds in its body despite of being shot countless times. He was a 42-year-old homeless man who was known to wander around from one vicinity to another, and he died because of hunger. There was no sighting of the same kind ever since, and this case remained confidential until now.